Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Usually when we talk about understanding our place in the universe, there's this underlying expectation of precision.
Right, like engineering or something.
Yeah, exactly like engineering.
Right.
You look at a map, you see the continents, the borders are drawn in this thick, decisive black ink, and you can just point and say, well, there it is. That is where I end, and that's where the rest of the world begins.
It's very geographic, but it's also, it's deeply psychological, We rely heavily on those borders.
We really do. It's binary, inside or outside. Me, or, not me. Creator or creation. It's clean and, honestly, it's deeply comforting.
Oh, absolutely. We like things to be visible and categorized.
Right, to have these distinct, impermeable boundaries.
Mm.
Because it's a very tangible sense of self. It lets you know that you're you sitting in your chair, and you are definitely not the chair.
Yeah, because if you are the chair, well, things get complicated very quickly.
Very quick.
We build our entire lives, our laws, our relationships on the fundamental assumption that we are distinct individual beings interacting with other distinct individual beings.
But then, you step into the world of philosophical theology, and suddenly you encounter ideas where that map is just completely erased.
Totally gone.
Yeah. And that evaporation of the self is exactly what we are exploring today on our deep dive. We are taking a giant stack of notes and excerpts from Charles Hodge's systematic theology, specifically his exhaustive writings on a concept that has dominated human history in ways you might not even realize.
It really has.
We are talking about pantheism, and the goal today is to figure out exactly what it is, how it built entire civilizations, and why it fundamentally alters how we view human life and morality.
And I think it's crucial we do this deep dive today because when you hear the word pantheism now, what comes to mind? Usually it's this very sanitized, kind of Instagram-friendly version.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
You think of a quirky, nature-loving spirituality, hugging trees, feeling connected to the mountains, a sort of poetic appreciation for the outdoors.
Right. People say, oh, I feel the divine in the forest, or I vibe with the universe.
Exactly, the universe vibes. But Hodge's analysis reveals that historically and philosophically, pantheism is something entirely different. And frankly, it's much more intimidating.
It's not just a feeling you get when you look at a nice sunset.
Not at all. It is a massive, rigorously defined, and incredibly pervasive system of thought. In fact, historically speaking, it is the ultimate heavyweight rival to theism.
The ultimate rival.
Yeah. It is an all-encompassing logical framework that if you actually follow its premises to their conclusions, it devours everything in its path. Your personality, your freedom, your morality, it all just gets swallowed up.
And that is the journey we're taking today. Because to really grasp why this matters to you, we have to look at how this idea operates under the hood.
We have to get into the mechanics of it.
Right. We're going to travel from the ancient civilizations of India, through the minds of Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, all the way to modern thinkers.
Yeah.
We need to see how one single idea, the idea that the universe is God, can actually lead to the deification of evil itself.
It's a profound and, honestly, a really unsettling shift. But before we explore the consequences of this worldview, we really need to define what it actually is, separating the popular myth from the philosophical reality.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the word itself, because I think that's where a lot of the confusion begins. If we just look at the etymology, the literal meaning of pantheism from the Greek is pretty simple, right?
Right. Pan meaning all, and theos meaning God.
Right. All is God. The universe is God, and God is the universe. But Hodge throws a massive flag on the play right out of the gate here. The popular definition is actually a major distortion of the philosophical reality.
He does point that out, yeah. He notes that true pantheists, the philosophers who actually built these systems, they completely reject that simple, literal definition. Yeah, they argue that it's a gross, almost insulting misrepresentation to say that the universe, viewed merely as an aggregate of individual things, is God.
Okay, an aggregate. Meaning, like, if I take a pile of rocks, add a forest of trees, throw in some clouds, a flock of birds, and all 8 billion humans on Earth, and just put them in a giant cosmic blender, that aggregate pile of stuff is not God.
Exactly. Pantheists do not believe that the sum total of physical objects equals God. Hodge uses this brilliant analogy to explain this distinction. Think about human consciousness.
Okay.
Are the contents of your consciousness at any one specific moment, the thought you're having right now, the itch on your arm, the sound of my voice, are those fleeting things the entirety of you?
Well, no. Obviously not. They're just things happening to me.
Right. There are phenomena happening within you. Another analogy he uses, which I think is even more helpful, is the ocean.
Oh, I love the ocean analogy. So think about the waves on the ocean. A wave rises up, it takes a specific shape, it crashes, and then it recedes. If you pointed to a single wave or even 1,000 waves and said, look, that is the ocean, you'd be entirely missing the point.
You'd be looking at the surface, yeah.
Right. The waves are just temporary forms. They're temporary manifestations.
Yeah.
The ocean is the vast, deep, unified substance underneath that causes the waves to exist at all.
Precisely. In pantheism, the universe we see, the stars, the trees, you and me, we are just the waves. We are the temporary phenomena.
It's just a wave.
God is the underlying ocean. God is the one single infinite substance that is currently taking the shape of a tree or a star or a human. And because so many people misunderstand this distinction, a lot of pantheistic philosophers actually get highly offended if you call them pantheists or atheists.
Wait, really? They get offended?
Oh, absolutely. They will vehemently affirm their belief in God, but their definition of God is so radically alien to the Christian or traditional theistic understanding that they are essentially speaking a totally different language.
Okay, so if God is the underlying substance, what exactly is that substance made of? Because looking through Hodge's notes, there isn't just one flavor of pantheism.
No, there are several.
There seem to be deep disagreements among these philosophers about what the ocean actually is.
That's right. To categorize this, the text outlines 3 main philosophical flavors of pantheism based on how they view that ultimate substance. The first, and perhaps most common historically, is a system that ascribes both mind and matter to the infinite being.
Mind and matter, okay.
Yeah. In this view, thought and physical extension, meaning like physical stuff that takes up space, are both just attributes of one universal substance, like 2 sides of the same coin.
So God is both the physical rock and the thought I have about the rock.
Yes, exactly. The second form is materialistic pantheism. This one goes completely in one direction and ascribes only the attributes of matter to the infinite.
Only matter.
Only matter. In this view, thought, soul, and spirit don't really exist as distinct realities at all. They are just highly refined, complex movements of physical matter. God is just the eternal physical universe.
Which honestly just sounds like atheism with better branding.
It functionally is atheism. And then the third is idealistic pantheism, which goes the exact opposite direction.
So everything is spirit.
Right. This view ascribes only the attributes of spirit or thought to the infinite. It claims the physical world is essentially an illusion. Matter doesn't really exist. Everything is just the thought life of the infinite spirit.
That is wild. But despite these massive differences, whether they think everything is matter or everything is spirit or a mix of both, Hodge points out that there is one foundational, non-negotiable principle that binds all of pantheism together.
It's a linchpin.
Right. If you remove this, the whole system just collapses. And that is monism.
Monism. The all-one doctrine. This is the absolute bedrock of the entire worldview. Monism vehemently, aggressively denies all dualism in the universe.
Well, dualism.
Right. In traditional theism, you have dualism, right? You have God and you have the world God created. They are 2 distinct, separate things.
The creator and the creature.
Exactly. But in monism, there is no essential distinction between matter and mind, between the soul and the body, and crucially, fundamentally, between God and the world.
Wow.
The infinite and the finite are not 2 different things. There is only one substance, one real being in existence. Everything else is just a phase.
There is a quote here from the French philosopher Victor Cousin that really twists your brain into a pretzel trying to grasp it. Cousin argues that the finite cannot exist without the infinite, which makes sense to us. But then he says the infinite can only be realized by developing itself in the finite. They are absolutely locked together.
Right. Think about the implications of what Cousin is saying there. If the infinite can only be realized by developing itself in the finite, then God needs the universe just as much as the universe needs God.
God needs the universe. That's a huge departure.
It is. Which leads to the next major point of agreement among all pantheists, the concept of coeternity.
Coeternity, meaning if God has always existed, the universe has always existed.
Exactly. Because the infinite only realizes itself in the finite, the world is not just made of the same substance as God, it is co-eternal with God.
Which completely obliterates the concept of creation. Not just the biblical narrative, but the very philosophical concept of a creator.
Totally gone.
So God did not exist independently, in the dark, decide to make a universe out of nothing, and then speak it into existence.
Right. The doctrine of creation out of nothing is completely impossible in pantheism. You cannot have a creator who stands outside of time and space and makes something new.
So what do you have instead?
Instead, what you have is an eternal, necessary evolution. The universe is just God eternally unfolding or developing himself. There was never a moment, even theoretically, when God existed without the world.
Man, as the German philosophers bluntly put it, without the world there is no God, and without God there is no world. So if God is just this eternal, necessary unfolding of the universe, what kind of God are we actually talking about here? Because this brings up a reality that I find genuinely terrifying in this text. We often think of God as a being who knows us, loves us, makes plans, hears prayers. But Hodge lays out the brutal logic here. This infinite being, in and of itself, has no intelligence, no consciousness, and no will.
None.
It is an entirely impersonal God.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it has to be impersonal. Let's break down the mechanics of why that is. Think about what personality and consciousness actually require.
Right.
To be conscious, to have a personality, requires a distinction between the self and the not-self.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. To say I am, you have to implicitly understand that there are things that are not me. I know I am me because I know I am not you.
Yeah.
I can look at you, address you, have a relationship with you.
Right. Consciousness requires an object. I am thinking about something. I am looking at something.
Exactly. But if God is literally everything, if there is only monism, only one substance, there is no not-self for God, there is no outside.
Because he is everything.
Right. There is nothing for God to look at, nothing for God to have a relationship with, because everything is just him. Therefore, the infinite cannot be a person who says I, and God cannot be addressed by us as thou.
There is no thou.
There is no thou. There is only an endless, unconscious it.
That is deeply isolating. It means that the universe is fundamentally lonely. And what's wild is that the philosophers admit this. They say that God only comes into existence, intelligence, and consciousness in the finite world.
Yes.
Meaning the only consciousness God has is the collective consciousness of you, me, the dog, the trees. God is essentially waking up momentarily through us.
Waking up is a great way to put it. The philosopher Hegel leaned into this hard. Hegel argued that God eternally produces nature for the express purpose of coming to self-consciousness.
Wait, really? So God is just trying to wake up?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
God is this blind, unconscious force that creates sentient beings just so he can finally have a thought. But as Cousin admits, if you take away nature and if you take away the human soul, every sign of God disappears entirely.
Wow.
An unconscious God, without a mind, without a will, without life, of whom you can only say the bare minimum he is like. He is that is not just lacking personality, for all practical purposes, for human beings trying to live their lives, that God is essentially nothing.
It's a void. You're praying to a void. So if this is the foundation, God is an unconscious ocean, the universe is coeternal, there's no creator-creature distinction, what does this all mean for us?
It means bad news for us.
Because if God is everything, and the universe is just his existence form, the immediate causal question is what happens to the human being? If the distinction between creator and creature is gone, I have to imagine my own individuality, my own distinct me-ness, is the next thing to go.
Oh, it is completely obliterated. This is where pantheism stops being an abstract metaphysical debate and becomes incredibly personal. According to Hodge's text, in this system, man is not an individual subsistence.
You're not your own person.
Right. You are not a distinct, enduring soul created by a loving God. You are merely, as he translates from the German thinkers, a moment in the life of God.
A moment that is so violently dismissive of human dignity. It goes back to that wave analogy.
Right, exactly.
The wave rises up. It looks like a distinct thing for a few seconds. It has a shape. It reflects the light. You can point to it. But then it crashes and dissolves right back into the ocean. It was never its own thing. It was always just ocean.
Just a temporary form.
Or the other analogy, Hodge references a leaf that buds on a tree, falls in the autumn, decays into the soil, and is renewed year after year as another leaf.
And they apply that biological seasonal reality to your very soul. In pantheism, your body is the only thing that creates the temporary illusion of distinction. Because you have a separate physical body from me, you think you have a separate soul.
Right, because I can see I'm not you.
But when your body perishes, your personality ceases with it. There is absolutely no conscious afterlife for man. You don't go to heaven. You don't face judgment. You don't reunite with loved ones. You just cease to be a you.
This brings up that deeply tragic story in Hodge's notes about the philosopher Schleiermacher.
Oh, yeah, that is a heartbreaking story.
It really is. Schleiermacher is a massive figure in modern theology, and he was raised by the Moravians. If you know anything about the Moravians, they were steeped in this deeply personal, highly relational, emotional Christian piety.
Very deeply relational.
They loved Jesus as a personal friend. So Schleiermacher grew up with this intense belief in a personal God and in his own personal immortality.
Hmm.
But then he goes to university, he studies his philosophy, he embraces pantheism, and he writes about the devastation of it.
The total loss.
He watched that personal God and his own eternal life just vanish from his sight. He exchanged the warm, loving God of his childhood for this cold, impersonal, absolute divinity of philosophy.
And the tragic irony of it all is that in pantheism, the absolute highest destiny you can possibly hope for, the ultimate goal of all your spiritual striving, is exactly that. It's the complete and utter absorption of your soul back into the infinite.
So your goal is self-destruction.
Basically, your greatest hope is to cease to exist as an individual.
But wait, let's bring this down to a practical level for a second. If I am just a temporary manifestation of God, a wave on the ocean, what about my daily life? What about my choices? What about free will?
Free will doesn't exist.
Because if I am just God acting out a moment, do I actually have any say in what I do today? Or am I just along for the ride?
You are entirely along for the ride. Free will is an absolute illusion.
An illusion.
Think about the logic. If human acts are just modes of God's existence, and since God's acts are necessary evolutions of his nature, remember, God isn't making choices either. He's just unfolding necessarily. Then your free will is impossible.
Wow.
Spinoza, who is basically the patron saint of modern pantheism, is incredibly blunt about this. He calls the human soul a spiritual automaton. You do not act, you are acted upon.
Okay, wait. If I am just a spiritual automaton, how do they explain away my daily experience of making choices?
What do you mean?
I mean, I woke up this morning, I looked at my kitchen counter, and I made a conscious choice to brew coffee instead of tea. I chose to drive to work instead of walking. If I am insulted, I can choose to forgive, or I can choose to hold a grudge. How can a system survive if it tells people their freedom is completely fake?
That is the insidious genius of the system, and also its ultimate trap. Cousin and Spinoza address this directly, and they use a fascinating, if bleak, defense.
Okay.
They argue that the necessity by which a mind thinks and makes a choice is just as absolute, just as governed by unbreakable laws, as the necessity by which a stone falls to the ground when you drop it.
So gravity pulls the stone, and what exactly is pulling my mind to choose the coffee?
The rational self-determination of the universe. They argue that you feel like you are choosing because you're conscious of your desires, but you are completely ignorant of the causes that determine those desires.
So I just don't see the strings attached to me.
Right. Your liberty is just spontaneity determined by reason. And here's the kicker, that reason in you is not your own personal, independent reason. It is the impersonal reason of God explicating itself within you.
Explaining itself.
Yeah. The universe required coffee to be made at that exact coordinate in space and time, so it produced the desire for coffee in the temporary manifestation called you.
So I am essentially a plant, a highly complex thinking plant.
Precisely. All your acts are God's acts, determined by the strict necessity of his nature. As Hodge's critique points out, this destroys liberty by divorcing it from intelligence and choice. You are growing exactly as the universal seed dictated, entirely at the mercy of fate.
Wow.
And if you scale that up, history itself is not a drama of human choices. It is just the necessary, unchangeable, robotic self-evolution of God.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because if my free will is an illusion, and every single action I take is actually just an extension of God evolving necessarily what happens to right and wrong.
Ah, yes, the morality problem.
Think about this. If I see an elderly woman struggling with her groceries, and I stop and help her across the street, pantheism says, well, that is God acting.
Right.
But if I ignore her, or worse, if I mug her, is that God too?
According to the strict, undeniable logic of pantheism, yes. Both are God.
Both are God.
Both are God. And this leads to what Hodge considers the most shocking, destructive, and socially dangerous revelation in his entire analysis, the complete and total denial of sin.
How can they possibly deny sin? We see evil every single day.
Because of monism. If God is the substance of all phenomena, if there is only one substance in the universe, then there is absolutely nothing in us that is not in God.
Okay.
Therefore, what we call evil or sin cannot be a rebellion against God because you cannot rebel against yourself. Instead, they define evil merely as a limitation. It is just undeveloped good.
Undeveloped good. Wait, so they're saying a murder is just a hug that hasn't fully matured yet? That is absurd.
It sounds absurd to us, yes.
If an acorn is an undeveloped oak tree, I get that. But how is malice just undeveloped kindness?
Hodge uses an analogy to expose this exact absurdity. He says, water is water, whether it is in a muddy puddle or the vast ocean. It's the same substance.
Right.
In pantheism, God is God, whether he is manifesting in the Emperor Nero, who was torturing and burning Christians alive in his gardens, or manifesting in the Apostle John, who was writing letters about divine love.
That is staggering.
Yeah.
To look at human history and say Nero is just as much a necessary manifestation of God as John.
It gets worse. The philosopher Hegel's take on sin is genuinely mind-blowing.
Worse than Nero.
Oh, yeah. Remember, Hegel thinks God is trying to achieve self-consciousness through us. So Hegel argues that sin is actually something unspeakably higher than the law-abiding motion of the planets or the innocence of plants.
Wait, sin is higher than innocence. How does he justify that?
Because for Hegel, a plant cannot sin because it has no consciousness. It's just biological machinery. But a human committing a sin requires consciousness. It requires a mind, a will, an action. So a human committing a sin is actually God exercising a higher, more evolved level of conscious existence than a plant just sitting there innocently in the dirt.
So rebellion is an upgrade.
In Hegel's system, yes. Spinoza echoes this, claiming that sin expresses no reality whatsoever. He says sin only exists as a concept for us because of our limited, finite perspective.
We just don't see the big picture.
Exactly. We see someone get hurt and we call it bad. But from the perspective of the infinite, from God's point of view, it's all just necessary gears turning in the cosmic machine. Sin does not exist for God.
If sin is just a lack of development or a limited perspective, and goodness isn't about moral purity, then what is goodness? Because if I strip away moral right and wrong, the only thing left to govern human interaction is power.
Precisely. In this system, might makes right, because power is the only evidence of development. Power is goodness. Spinoza argues explicitly that the measure of a man's right is strictly his power.
So whoever is strongest is the most right.
He writes that to follow your impulses is not only a necessity, it is your sovereign right and your duty, and anyone who tries to starve you is an enemy of nature.
If might makes right, doesn't this philosophy provide the ultimate justification for every tyrant, every dictator, every conqueror in human history? If might is right, then oppression is divine.
It is.
And Hodge quotes Cousin on this, and the quote is chilling. Cousin is talking about war and conquest, and he says that feebleness is a vice that deserves to be beaten. How does someone like Cousin justify saying that feebleness is a vice? He argues that the vanquished party deserves to be vanquished because the victor serves civilization.
What's fascinating here is the sheer, brutal, uncompromising logic of it that makes it so terrifying. If God is the life of the world and all power in the universe is his power and every act that happens is his necessary act, then whoever holds the most power is, by definition, the most morally supreme. Victory on the battlefield, or in politics or in business, is proof of divine manifestation. Cousin says that to complain about the vanquished being crushed, to shed a tear for the victims of history, is to take part against humanity. It is the ultimate philosophy of hero worship. It worships success, no matter how bloody the path to get there was.
Which leads to the absolute logical endpoint of all this. Where does this train finally stop?
It stops at some very dark places.
Hodge says it ends in self-deification. If everything is God and I am a conscious being, then I am God. We see this in the Hindu mystic claiming, I am Brahm. But it doesn't just stop at arrogance. It goes from self-deification to a word that Hodge uses, which is truly horrifying. Pandiablism, what does that mean?
Pandiablism means the deification of evil. A German philosopher named Rosenkranz took pantheism to its unavoidable final conclusion. If God is everything, and if Satan exists, or if evil exists in the world, then God must be Satan.
God must be Satan.
The wicked, the abusers, the tyrants, they're just one form of God's self-manifestation. Evil isn't good, and good isn't evil. There is no line between them.
And this is exactly why Hodge argues that pantheism is infinitely worse than regular atheism. Think about it. An atheist looks at the universe and says there is no God. The sky is empty.
Right, it's just a negative belief.
It is a negative philosophy. It leaves a void. It might be bleak, but it doesn't worship the darkness. But pantheism looks at the horrors of the world and says, there is a God, and he is the evil you are looking at. It actively makes evil divine.
Hodge calls it the devoutly godless blasphemy of the angel of light, because it dresses up ultimate darkness in the language of spirituality. Think about what this does to ethics. It gives the sensualist, the hedonist, the abuser absolute divine authority for every indulgence.
Because their desires are God's desires.
Because the physical body and its desires are just a mode of God. Therefore, the body has its divine rights. To deny a desire is to deny God.
That is the philosophical theory, and it is terrifying on paper. But one might argue, okay, sure, a few German philosophers sitting in their comfortable studies can write these edgy books, but no one could actually live like this. Society would collapse.
Right, people say it's just academic.
But Hodge doesn't let us off the hook that easily. He takes us out of the European universities and travels back thousands of years to ancient India to show us what happens when an entire civilization actually builds its society, its religion, and its daily life on this exact philosophy.
Yes, the Indian experience is the ultimate historical test case for pantheism as a lived religion. We are talking about the ancient Aryans in India. This is a highly developed, incredibly complex civilization that predates the golden ages of Greece and Rome by a long shot.
Right.
And they didn't just dabble in pantheism, they built their entire societal structure on it, and it has lasted for millenniums.
So how do they formulate this? Who or what is God in their system?
The foundational concept in Brahminical pantheism is that God is Brahm. And it is absolutely crucial to note that in their language, Brahm is neuter.
Neuter. Like an
Or-
it.
Yes. It is not a he, not a person, not a father. Brahm is infinite, unconscious, unthinking being. And this unconscious void comes to consciousness in the world over millions and millions of years. And they express this process through a famous triad, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva.
Now, coming from a Western perspective, someone might hear triad and immediately think of the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, three distinct persons in one God. But Hodge is very careful to clarify that this is not a trinity of persons.
Right. Not even close. Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva are not persons having a relationship with each other. They are a philosophical formula. It is thesis, analysis, and synthesis.
Okay, what does that mean practically?
Or, as it is often translated, being, development, and restoration. The unconscious Brahm comes into existence as Brahma, develops and sustains through all finite forms as Vishnu, and eventually, after ages, everything is destroyed and resolved back into the unconscious abyss by Shiva, only to start all over again.
But wait, if they believe in this one overarching infinite neuter being, how do they end up with a religion that famously has millions and millions of distinct gods? It seems like a massive contradiction. How do you go from monism to polytheism?
It does seem contradictory until you understand the mechanics of how the infinite manifests. In this system, because God is everything, the infinite manifests itself in degrees.
Degrees is God.
Yeah. There is more of God in a living animal than in a dead rock. There is more of God in a human than in an animal. Because of this sliding scale of divinity, any extraordinary thing in nature, a massive river, a terrifying storm, or any remarkable person, a great warrior, a brilliant thinker, is immediately viewed as a special concentration of God.
So they become a god.
They're an avatar. If everything is God, you can deify anything that stands out. Polytheism is just the natural, popular symptom of an underlying pantheism.
And because of what we just explored regarding morality, that pantheism completely denies the difference between moral good and moral evil, these millions of gods do not have to be good. In fact, many of them are terrifying.
That is the most startling aspect of their religion. Morality is completely, entirely divorced from religion. Hodge details how even blatant evil can be an object of deep reverence.
Yeah, he mentions Kali.
Take the goddess Kali, for instance. She is often depicted as the patroness of murderers and thieves. Why would you worship a god of murder? Because in a pantheistic system, malignant passion, destruction, and violence are just as much a mode of divine manifestation as heroic virtue or self-sacrifice. Power is power.
There was a chilling quote from Professor Wilson that Hodge includes here. Wilson studied this extensively, and he notes that in this Brahminical system, personal conduct is wholly immaterial to your spiritual standing.
Wholly immaterial.
He says that a monster of iniquity, someone who commits horrific crimes against their fellow man, can be absolutely certain of advancement in their next life, or even heaven, if they simply perform the correct rituals. If they repeat the name of a deity over and over, or if they brand their skin with a hot iron to show devotion.
Because in a world where God is everything, moral defilement doesn't exist. You can't sin morally, you can only sin ceremonially.
Okay.
The only thing that matters is the ritual, because the ritual is what aligns you with the cosmic machine. And this exact logic is what built the anthropology of the Hindus, which we know as the caste system. If you want to understand how a society functions when it genuinely believes human beings are just moments in the life of God, you just have to look at the caste system.
We talked earlier about the analogies of the wave and the leaf. But when discussing the caste system, Hodge uses two different powerful analogies to explain what happens to the human soul. He says the soul is like a bottle of seawater thrown into the ocean.
Great visual.
The water inside the bottle is exactly the same substance as the vast water outside. When the bottle breaks, which represents physical death, the water inside merges with the ocean and its individuality is completely, permanently lost.
The other analogy he uses is a lump of salt thrown into the sea. Once it dissolves, you can never, ever get it back. The boundaries are gone forever.
And the entire Indian society was structured around how close you are to that final absorption. The caste system isn't just about economic class or job specialization. It is deeply justified by their theology.
Oh, completely.
The Brahminical class, the priests, are considered a higher, more evolved manifestation of God. The theology claims they proceeded from the head of Brahm. The military class comes from the arms, the mercantile or business class from the body, and the Sudras, the servile lowest class, come from the feet.
So think about the psychological impact of that. If you are born a Sudra, your feebleness, your poverty, your low status is not an injustice that needs to be fixed. It is a fact of divine manifestation. You deserve to be there, as Cousin would argue.
It's just your fate.
It is your fate. And you cannot move up in this life through hard work or education. You just have to do your assigned rituals, accept your subservience, and hope that in the next cycle of transmigration you were born a little higher up the body of Brahm.
It creates an absolute societal gridlock. And it creates an intense, paralyzing horror of losing caste. Because if you break the ceremonial rules, if you eat the wrong thing, or associate with the wrong person, you aren't just socially ostracized.
No, it's much worse.
Theologically, you could be reborn as a reptile or a lower life form, setting your journey to absorption back by millions of years. The stakes are literally cosmic.
And this brings us to a profound observation by the scholar Max Mueller, which Hodge highlights. Mueller spent his life studying these texts, and he contrasts the ancient Greek mind with the ancient Hindu mind.
How so?
The Greeks, whatever their philosophical flaws, generally love the present life. They love the reality of the physical world, art, athletics, politics. But to the Hindu mind, shaped over millenniums by pantheism, existence on Earth is a dream. It's literally called Maya, an illusion.
Maya.
The human soul enters the world as a stranger, a captive, and its only goal, its only desperate desire, is to be delivered from the illusion of existence.
So what does this all mean for their society? When you really let that sink in, you realize how devastating this is to human progress. It sounds like it completely cuts the nerves of human exertion.
It completely severs them. Hodge concludes that it destroys all interest in the present life. Why would you try to improve society? Why would you build hospitals? Why would you fight injustice? Why would you invent new technologies if the physical world is just a painful illusion, if everything is faded, and if your ultimate goal is just to lose your consciousness in the infinite?
You would.
It promotes absolute fatalism. And worse, as Hodge notes, it even sanctifies cruelty and indecency in worship because all passion, however dark, is just a mode of divine manifestation. It is a philosophy of despair dressed up as enlightenment.
So, hearing all this, we might look at ancient India and think, well, that is fascinating anthropology. But it is a world away. We live in the West. Our society is built on different foundations. But the reality that Hodge forces us to confront is that the Greeks, the very founders of Western intellectual thought, the guys whose statues are in all our libraries, fell into the exact same pantheistic trap.
They did. They just approached it from a different angle.
While India lived pantheism as a daily religion, the Greeks developed it as a high-minded intellectual speculation.
Yes, and Hodge walks us through the history of Greek philosophy to show how every major school trended unavoidably toward this modernism. They were desperately trying to solve the problem of the one and the many.
The one and the many.
How do you have one universe with millions of diverse things in it? Because they could not handle the idea of a creator distinct from the creation, they were forced to find a single substance that makes up everything.
Let's trace this because it's fascinating to see brilliant minds hit the same dead end over and over. Let's start with the Ionic school. These are your early materialistic pantheists. You've got Thales looking at the world, seeing how essential moisture is to life, and concluding that everything is fundamentally made of water.
Right.
Then Anaximenes comes along, looks at the sky, and says, no, it's air. Air condenses into clouds, clouds into rain, rain into earth. And then you have Heraclitus. Heraclitus is fascinating. He looks at the world and sees constant change. So he says the ultimate substance isn't water or air, it's fire or caloric energy. He literally said the entire world is an eternal fire, constantly dying out and rekindling itself.
The historian Dollinger, whom Hodge quotes extensively here, notes that for Heraclitus, the idea of permanent, stable being is a delusion.
Hmm.
Everything is in a state of perpetual
What could
flux.
be?
It's an eternal, going to be, but never quite arriving. And Heraclitus called this all-comprehending, swirling primal fire Zeus. He gave it a divine name.
But calling it Zeus doesn't make it God. Cousin calls this out perfectly in his critique. He says, for the Ionic school, there was no other God than nature. They were just looking at physics and giving it theological titles. To speak honestly, this kind of materialistic pantheism is really nothing but atheism with a poetic name for thermodynamics.
Exactly. Then you have the Eleatic school, championed by Parmenides. He looked at the materialists and went in the exact opposite direction. He realized that physical things change and decay, so they can't be the ultimate reality.
So what did he do?
He denied the reality of the material world entirely. He attained the concept of a pure, simple being, just abstract existence, and said all the physical things we perceive with our senses are just illusions. It is a strict idealist pantheism.
And then the Stoics come along later and essentially smash these two ideas together. The Stoics are huge in ancient Rome. Guys like Marcus Aurelius were Stoics. They adopt this concept of the world fire. They believe that God and matter are identical. God is the active element, the world soul. But he is not separate from the world. He is trapped inside it, animating it like a soul animates a body.
And because of that, the Stoics ended up adopting the exact same Hindu doctrine of cyclical dissolution.
Really, like the Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva thing.
Exactly. They believed in this great cosmic conflagration where the universe eventually burns up and resolves entirely back into God, which they called the pure ether. And then, like a phoenix rising from the ashes, the world is reborn, and everything repeats itself down to the minutest detail over and over ad infinitum. History is just a skipping record.
Which, just like in India, completely kills free will. The Stoic philosopher Chrysippus said that acts of vice, crimes, human failings are just necessary movements of universal nature. Evil is just like chaff falling from wheat. It is unavoidable, it is worthless, but it is necessary for the machine to keep running. You can't blame anyone for it.
But the real giants of Greek philosophy, the ones who shaped Western thought forever and whose ideas eventually collided with Christianity, are Plato and Aristotle. And this is where Hodge's critique gets incredibly nuanced and really valuable.
I have to admit, I have always heard Plato and Aristotle championed as foundational to Western thought. Christian theologians like Augustine leaned on Plato. Thomas Aquinas leaned heavily on Aristotle. They are considered the greats of reason. How did these brilliant minds miss the concept of a personal creator and instead fall into these pantheistic traps?
That is the crucial question, and it takes some deep digging to understand where they went wrong. Let's look at Plato first. Plato was the philosopher of the ideal world. He absolutely did not believe in a personal, extra-mundane God who created the world out of nothing by the word of his power. For Plato, God was an idea specifically, the idea of the good, which comprehended all other ideas.
This connects to his famous analogy of the cave, right?
Yes, exactly.
We are chained in a cave, looking at shadows on the wall. The things we see in daily life, trees, animals, people, justice, are just temporary, flawed shadows of eternal, immutable ideas or forms that exist in the divine mind.
Yes. And here is where the pantheistic bias sneaks in. Dollinger points out that for Plato, these eternal ideas are not beside God or external to God. They are founded in God, and God is the all-comprehensive idea. Therefore, all that there is of intelligence in the world, down to your own human mind, is actually a piece of the divine substance. You share the same substance as God.
But Plato did believe in matter, didn't he? He wasn't saying everything is just a thought.
He believed in matter, yes, but this eternal matter was chaotic, lifeless, and formless. It was almost nothing. Crucially, it was not created by God.
God didn't make the matter.
No, God just stumbled upon it, essentially. God endowed this dead matter with a portion of his own intelligence to create the world soul, the demiurgus, which actually framed the visible universe. So in Plato's system, God is not even the creator. He's just the architect who ordered pre-existing chaotic matter. And human souls are just individualizations of this world soul mixed with divine intelligence.
So you are a piece of God, trapped in uncreated matter, and then his star student Aristotle comes along and rejects Plato's realm of ideas. Aristotle is the philosopher of the natural, tangible world. He believed the world and God are coeternal. But his version of God is incredibly bizarre and cold. Aristotle's God is pure intelligence, but completely destitute of power and will.
Yes, completely destitute.
This God is completely unconscious that the universe even exists.
It's the ultimate narcissistic deity. Aristotle's God is entirely occupied with thinking about himself because he is the only thing worthy of his thought. He only acts on the world like a magnet acts on a piece of iron just by existing. He unconsciously awakens the dormant powers of matter, drawing it toward himself. But he doesn't know he's doing it.
And for Aristotle, what happens to the human soul?
For Aristotle, the soul is just the forma, the vital, animating principle of the physical body, like the life of a plant. When the body dies, the soul dies with it. All self-consciousness ceases entirely. There is no personal immortality.
So to answer the question about how these brilliant minds missed it, Dollinger provides what I think is the key insight of this entire historical section. He says that all of antiquity, Plato, Aristotle, the Stoics, the materialists, they all suffered from an imperfect acquaintance with the idea of personality and absolute liberty.
That's the missing key, personality.
Because they lacked the revelation of a personal creator who speaks things into existence out of nothing, they could not bridge the gap from pure, simple being to the manifold, diverse, messy world we live in without making the world part of God's actual substance. They simply did not have the category for a God who could remain entirely distinct from creation while still sustaining it.
They couldn't crack the code of personality. They couldn't conceive of a God who could say, "Let there be light," and the light was not made of his own essence. And because they couldn't crack that code, they passed this philosophical baton, this deeply flawed premise of monism, forward through history. The Greeks did not have the final word. The deep dive transitions into how this persistent, seductive idea infiltrated the Middle Ages and laid the very groundwork for modern modes of philosophy.
It survived the fall of Rome. It survived the rise of the church.
It did, primarily through Neoplatonism. Thinkers like Plotinus in the 3rd century took Plato's ideas and leaned heavily into the monism, the unity of all being. They taught that the world is just the affluence of God, the way heat radiates from a fire or light radiates from the sun. The universe is just an emanation of the divine.
And their ultimate spiritual goal was terrifyingly similar to the Hindu concept of absorption. They sought ecstasy, which Hodge defines as the mystical self-destruction of the individual person in God. They didn't want to think about God. They wanted to annihilate their own ego, their own distinctness, to merge back into the flame. It's spiritual suicide.
And this mystical, ecstatic pantheism crept right into the medieval church. Hodge highlights a 9th century thinker named John Scotus Erigena. Erigena is a fascinating, if unorthodox, figure. He taught that God's being consists literally in thinking. God is thought. And his thoughts are actual, tangible things.
Wait, unpack that for me. Because if I think of a unicorn doesn't just pop into my living room. How are his thoughts literal things?
Because Erigena argued that whatever exists in the mind and consciousness is the only true reality. Physical matter is an illusion. Since God's being is his thinking and his thoughts are the only reality, the universe is quite literally just God thinking.
Oh, wow.
Erigena said, "The thought of God is the real being of all that is. Therefore, the world is eternal because God's thoughts are eternal and God and the world are identical. You are just a thought in the mind of God."
And this mystical tradition, this blurring of the lines, paved the way for the man who brought pantheism roaring back into the modern era with mathematical precision, Baruch Spinoza. The way Hodge describes it, Spinoza took René Descartes' famous starting point, I think, therefore I am, and just ran absolutely wild with it.
Descartes is the father of modern philosophy. He believed in 3 distinct substances: God, mind, and matter. He thought you could prove them all rationally, but Spinoza looked at Descartes' definition of a substance. Descartes defined substance as that which exists of itself, completely independent of anything else. Spinoza looked at that and said, wait a minute. By that strict definition, there can only be one substance in existence: God, because only God is truly independent.
Spinoza's famous one-substance theory. He argues that everything your mind, the table, the stars, is just a mode or an attribute of that one, single, infinite substance. Hodge uses a brilliant analogy here about looking through colored glass to explain how Spinoza accounts for the difference between a thought and a physical object.
Yes, imagine holding a piece of red glass up to your eye and looking at a white wall. The wall appears red. Look through a blue glass, the wall appears blue. The color isn't a reality of the wall itself, it's entirely dependent on the lens you're looking through. Spinoza said that the one infinite substance, God, appears to us under 2 attributes: thought and extension, meaning physical matter.
So for Spinoza, the physical world and our thoughts are just 2 different colored lenses we look through, but it's all exactly the same substance underneath. My thought about a tree and the physical wood of the tree are the exact same thing, just viewed through different attributes.
Precisely. The differences are apparent to our limited minds, but they are not real. The finite world has no real existence of its own. It is completely irrevocably sunk into the infinite. But here is the trap. The fatal flaw in Spinoza's logic that Hodge exposes: if the infinite is a substance of which nothing specific can be affirmed, because if you define it, you limit it, then it is practically nothing. Spinoza's famous phrase here is omnis determinatio est negatio, all determination is negation.
Let me make sure I grasp that. Omnis determinatio est negatio. If you define something, you limit it. So if I say a table is square, I am saying it is not round. I have negated its roundness. By defining it, I have limited its possibilities.
Exactly. So to keep God truly infinite, Spinoza argues you have to strip away all definitions. You cannot say God is loving, because that means he is not wrathful. You cannot say God is just. You cannot say God has a will. You cannot even say God is a person, because all those definitions are limitations.
So you strip away love, justice, personality, will, consciousness, and what are you left with? A blank void? The infinite becomes zero. By trying to make God everything, Spinoza mathematically reduced God to nothing.
It is logically airtight within its own premises, but it completely destroys the reality of both God and the world.
Which brings us to the profound clash between this pervasive philosophy and the core of who we actually are. Bringing this entire deep dive to a close, Hodge lays out exactly why pantheism, despite its historical power, despite its seduction for brilliant minds from ancient India to modern Europe, ultimately fails. He said it does violence to human nature.
It contradicts our most basic, undeniable, intuitive convictions. We are intuitively conscious that we are free agents. You know you make choices, you deliberate, you weigh options, you feel the weight of responsibility. To deny that, to say you are just a spiritual automaton, is to deny your own reality.
We also know, intuitively, that there is a real objective distinction between moral good and evil. We know that love is better than cruelty. We know that the person who sacrifices themselves to save a child is objectively morally better than the tyrant who crushes the weak for his own pleasure. Pantheism tells us that conviction is a delusion, that Nero and John are the same. Human nature violently rejects that.
Furthermore, rational religion requires a personal, moral being. You cannot worship an atmosphere. You cannot pray to the law of gravitation or to a geometric axiom. Religion, by definition, requires a God who can hear, who is distinct from you, and to whom you are responsible.
Which is why the final synthesis from Hodge is so devastating. He calls pantheism the worst form of atheism.
And we must understand why he uses such strong language. Atheism is merely negative. It leaves an empty throne. But pantheism fills that throne with the deification of man and the deification of evil. It strips away your immortality, your soul, your personality, and replaces it with the bleak, fatalistic destiny of a falling leaf. It says the worst atrocities in human history are just God expressing himself. It is a philosophy of despair.
Which leaves you with a final thought to mull over today. In our modern world, you increasingly hear people say things like, "I just trust the universe," or they view themselves as one with the cosmos. They usually say this in an attempt to find a more enlightened, liberated, open-minded spirituality. But based on the source material we've explored today, you have to ask a hard question. Does dissolving the boundary between the creator and the creation actually liberate you? Or does it ultimately erase your individuality, your freedom, and your ability to call anything truly good or truly evil? Does trusting the universe just mean surrendering to a cold, unconscious machine that does not even know you exist?
It is a question that requires us to look past the modern poetry and examine the actual historical foundations of our worldview.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep seeking, and we will see you next time.